everyone. Today I'd like to talk about sin, starting with what it is and also its use and necessity within religion, and finally, the moral implications of sin. So what exactly is sin? I looked into several sources to come up with the most common definitions, including dictionary.com, ironchariots.org, pathos.com, and newadvent.org. What I came up with was that there are two forms of sin, original sin and actual sin. I'll go over each of these and give my thoughts. However, I understand that this is one of those cases where there are probably as many meanings and understandings of sin as there are Christians to explain it. So I'm going to paint with a wide brush for the sake of this discussion. Let's look into original sin first. This is the sin committed by Adam and Eve after their disobedience by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The belief is that because of this sin, all of humanity is now cursed with a collective guilt, or at least that humanity was given over to a sinful nature. Either way, we are all born with this. The biggest problem with the Adam and Eve story is that it has no place in reality. We know there were no two first people. We know we are not made of dirt and a rib. We know there was never a time when everything was vegetarian and lived in a garden. And we know the earth is much older than 6,000 years. The arguments against this being literally true are everywhere, and I'm not the one to debunk them. But suffice it to say, if Adam and Eve never existed, then original sin can't be a thing. That being the case, I'm still going to talk about the notion of sin in the story, for the sake of argument of those who do believe it exists. Original sin comes from when Adam and Eve broke the rule that God said not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I think there are variations to that story, as with most everything in the Bible, but that's the gist. I can't for the life of me understand the logic behind what God did here. If he wanted Adam and Eve to be happy never having that knowledge, why put the tree there in the first place? If he wanted to test their loyalty, and being that he is omniscient, I find this action against any all-good nature he is said to have, because he knew they would fail, therefore making the test cruel to begin with. Anyway, if he wanted to test their loyalty, because he gave them free will, couldn't he have done this with a test that didn't come with such a heavy price? When a child fails to do something we expect of them, most people aren't going to jump to beating them for it. We take away a toy or make them sit in a corner or something. But humans break one infraction, one that, by definition, since Adam and Eve didn't know what right and wrong were, it was hardly a surprise that they broke it, and were cursed forever, with descendants that can now be thrown into everlasting torture. Honestly, this story is a hot mess. The concept of original sin is also the most, in my opinion, atrocious and vile thing in the Bible. The idea of telling people that from the moment they are born, they are unworthy, broken, bad, sick, however you want to put it, is just abhorrent. I honestly feel badly when I hear Christians talk about how they are sinners. I want to tell every Christian out there, you are not those things. You are human. You can and will make mistakes, but you do not and have never borne the weight of someone else's mistake. As a quote from one of my favorite movies says,
"You are what you choose to be. You choose.
Now let's talk about actual sin. This is any willful thought, desire, word, action, or omission forbidden by the law of God. There are two forms of sin under this heading as well: mortal sins, the really bad ones, and venial sins, the lesser offensive ones. But basically, this sin is, in effect, always an offense to God by breaking his laws. So here are my problems with this. What happens to people who don't know about these laws, such as people raised where they've never been introduced to Christianity, and young children? Does God just give them a pass? Well, he's supposed to be all loving, so I would think so. And what about people who continuously and knowingly break the laws, but then always ask for forgiveness? Their heart is obviously not in the right place, but they are technically following the rules, so do they always get into heaven? And then there are those who try their best not to break the rules, but they don't ask for forgiveness. Maybe they don't break the rules for other reasons than because God said not to do it. But nonetheless, the rules aren't broken, at least not majorly. Their hearts are in a better place. Should they not get in heaven because they are doing good for a different reason than God said so? But there's a bigger issue still with this system. Jesus isn't necessary. If sin is a breaking of God's law, how can that be done from the moment we're born? Which of the 10 Commandments has a newborn broken? Jesus' redeeming gesture is only valid for original sin, but if Adam and Eve didn't exist, what does account for the fall of man? If the rationale is that Jesus died and took away our sin, then, by logic, it follows that sin no longer exists, which either means that we can't sin anymore, or that God no longer considers anything a breaking of his law, or that he just forgives everything. Even if you say that he took away all past sins, but we can still do new ones, then Jesus' death still wouldn't matter to us now, because he could only have helped those up until his death, not after. I wasn't born yet, so Jesus could not have taken away my past sins. So without the idea of a sacrifice taking away sin, the situation becomes this. We sin, breaking God's law, and repent, God forgives. We sin and don't repent, God must judge us, and, finding us guilty, is required to send us to hell. While I don't really buy into the God has to be a perfect judge, so he can't forgive everyone argument, I'm actually not going to refute that here. I'm going to give in and say it's true for the sake of the discussion. So, even if that's the case, and God can't simply forgive everyone, they have to repent before death, here's my issue. If God really loves us and wants us to be in heaven with him, and he knows that the only way for us to do this is to recognize him and repent, he should be doing everything within his power to make us see the light and do this. And this is not a case of interfering with free will. He does not have to manipulate our minds at all to convince anyone that he exists. Paraphrasing Matt Dillahunty's argument, I don't know what would convince me, but God should know. There is no good reason that God could not convince each and every person if he truly loves us as much as it's preached that he does. He would be clawing at the chance to do it, showing up once a generation, submitting himself to testing, doing whatever it takes. Because as a parent, if I saw my child in danger, I would do anything to save them. I wouldn't be complacent to throw up my hands and say, oh well, I told him not to run in the street, I guess they should have listened. And I mean do whatever it takes. Not sending himself down in human form once 6,000 years ago and relying on people to pass down a message. Not in the form of toast and clouds and trees. No, show up in human form all the time. Talk to people directly. Show people who he is in person, unquestioningly. There is no need for him to hide. It does not affect our free will to see the truth and still reject it. So what do you think about sin? How does it work logistically? If you're a Christian, does it bother you to think of yourself as a sinner? If not, why? It bothered me when I was a believer. It never sat right with me. And what is your explanation for why God does not use his ultimate power to do whatever it takes to save each and every human that he loves? Anyway, that's it for now. So keep learning, keep questioning, and remember, it's okay to be wrong.